we do has an impact on local communities. So the minimum we can do is to be a good neighbor. And I also believe that we should maintain a clean plant, particularly when that effort is within our span of control. So as you can see in the slide, my background is 30 years in the Royal Air Force as an engineering authority for fast jets and tactical transport. And I followed that with 13 years in the paper industry, including responsibility for the maintenance of a water treatment facility. And this has been followed by 5 years as an operational excellence consultant. So I'd say that any expertise that I may have is in lean manufacturing, leadership, and coaching. And it's here that I've been able to have some influence on environmental issues that may have similarities to the issues that you face day to day. So I'm going to speak for about 25 minutes, and then I'll take any questions. So please don't make them too difficult. All I'm trying to do today is pass on some of my experience that may raise your awareness and help you look at your operation through slightly different eyes, and perhaps encourage you to make the small changes that are under your span of control. This talk may also spur you on to get to know your local requirements better. And having worked across the US, the UK, and Europe, my rider is that requirements can change even from county to county. So get to know what your local authority requires from you before you fall foul of some of the local regulations. So here's an example. Though not an emissions issue, it does demonstrate how an environmental issue about 12 years ago had a direct impact on a business while I was the plant maintenance and reliability manager. So if you could change the slide. So seemingly out of the blue, we were fined because the scrap skip that held ferrous metal had a hole in it, and the fine was worded that the rain would wash over the rusting scrap and cause ferrous runoff to enter the watercourse. That's obvious when you think about it now, but it was not obvious 15 years ago, and the fine hit our bottom line. The simple fix was to have the scrap merchant replace the skip and provide one that was not only intact, but was fitted with a cover. The interesting thing, though, is why did we not see this as an issue at the time? Well, primarily because we were not looking at our environment through an environmental lens. And this started to change my perspective on how, as maintenance engineers, we could impact our environment. And this began a change in my attitudes towards environmental issues and how the small changes can make a difference. The other thing that I've learned is that change always costs money. But in this regard, money is available in most countries to help businesses achieve environmental change, including emissions targets that are becoming more challenging. So I did a little bit of research about what's happening in Australia. And I see that the Australian government has put forward an additional $2 billion spread over 15 years to help businesses and farms reduce emissions, which brings the total investment up to $4.5 billion. And for this, the government wants a return of 100 million tons of emission reductions. And that's from a paper issued on the 16th of June last year. Next slide, please. So the Australian government has lodged an updated nationally determined contribution with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that I'm sure you know about, and as part of Australia's obligations under the Paris Agreement. So what does that mean? Well, it's committed Australia to more ambitious 2030 targets, reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 43% below the 2005 levels, and to do that by 2030, which is a 15% point increase on Australia's previous targets, and reaffirmed Australia's commitment to net zero by 2050. And that has a big impact on us as manufacturers and operators. And it restores Australia's Climate Change Authority as a source of independent policy advice. So what is that doing, and how does that impact us, or you, as we have our own regulations? But looking at a total ban on the export of waste plastic, paper, glass, and tires, reducing total waste generated in Australia by 10% per person, achieving an 80% average recovery rate from all waste streams, that includes those in industry, and significantly increasing the use of recycled content and phasing out problematic and unnecessary plastics, all of things which can impact us in industry. So there should already be a discussion in your businesses to include how this legislation will impact your day-to-day operations. Make sure that you brought into that discussion. You'll have your own environmental people, but I know the biggest interactions between the environmental guys in factories over here and maintenance is when something goes wrong. But we need to get ahead of that discussion and be taking proactive measures rather than reactive. So next slide, please. So I think the biggest change for us is to look at the environment as a business cultural change. And how do we bring that into our toolkit? Business needs to think about environmental impacts in the same way, I believe, as we think about industrial safety or quality. And that is as a cultural behavior that's driven by published core values and expectations to make environmental concern core to who we are and how we operate. Now, an interesting way I've taught this to other leaders, and a way to begin thinking in this way is to take an hour out of your day to walk with your leadership team wearing metaphorical environmental goggles in the same way as we do when we're walking around looking at behavior-based safety and quality concerns. So go and do a go-look-see at the macro level and look at everything from plant emissions to the micro level at the back of the scrap compound or in the boneyard, and act on that which is in your span of control. In this case, every interaction is an opportunity to better educate ourselves about the issues and to work collaboratively to find solutions. I think it's important that we take the lead before legislation takes the initiative from us. Positive action, I have found, is always cheaper than the fine from the environmental or local government agencies, as we had to live with the example I told you about the rain runoff. So we have to start to understand as maintenance folks how we are impacting our environment and what our facility is emitting in all its waste streams. What are we putting into our local environment? And a good place to start is just asking your people, not about the obvious, but about the stuff they're dealing with day to day, so we can understand the sources of waste and emissions and other environment impacts of how they work, and look closely at processes and procedures for opportunities to drive out waste and reduce carbon footprint. Though we may get the opportunity to have some influence, some level of influence on the design of a new installation or modification of some part of the plant or machinery, the bulk of what we do is with what we've got. The reality for most of the time is that our ability to limit the environmental impact of our operation is that daily responsibility we have in operating and maintaining our processes and machinery to minimize the environmental impact. And that is what I want to discuss for the remainder of this talk. Next slide, please. So we all know there's never been a greater responsibility for every business to maximize its efforts to drive to net zero. Correct machine maintenance coupled with lean process, which was just the domain of operations until so recently, is now proving to be a force multiplier across maintenance and engineering in the drive to net zero. And irrespective of the industry, the drive to net zero can be accelerated as business drives out waste in all its forms. As I've said, I don't propose that I have all the answers. I don't propose I even have some of the answers. My purpose is to promote a discussion with colleagues to find some of those answers together. And in my role as a lean OPEX and TPM consultant, I focus on driving out waste in 8 areas that you'll be familiar with. And now I want to consider these areas as signposts to direct us as maintenance and reliability engineers to reduce environmental impact and add to a facility's intent to be carbon neutral. The next slide. So the first of those 8 areas is waiting time. And waiting time costs money and increases emissions. When I'm auditing plant planned maintenance for compliance to schedule, I frequently hear that work was not completed due to waiting on parts or lack of manpower. If a job is on a schedule, it must have been a priority to reduce waste in some way, such as wasted time or lost production opportunity. So it must be a tenet of work order planning and prioritization. That's easy for you to say, that before any job is put onto the schedule, particularly if it's on a critical path, that parts and people are on site. You've got the parts in the storeroom and the tools are in the job box. That lost opportunity equals continued waste. And that impacts the environment, for example, running extra shifts to make up for reduced production. But what happens far too often is that parts of a production line are shut down in anticipation of work being carried out, whilst the remainder of the line, particularly in paper industry, carries on running without producing anything. And then there's a last-minute scramble by maintenance to try and do a workaround. This means frustration to operations, lost productivity, and wasted energy. And it's this wasted energy that detracts from the drive to net zero. It's somewhere we can impact. Moreover, the line will have to go through the whole process a second time when the parts do arrive. More wasted opportunity. The solution is maintaining a planning discipline. If the parts are not on hand, don't put the job on the schedule. I can't remember the number of times that I've spoken to a mechanic who said, well, I'm having to do the job twice because I didn't have the time or the parts to do it properly the first time. That's something within our span of control and something we can change. And next slide, please. The second of those waste areas that I want us to think about is overproduction. The manufacturing product just to keep a machine running with no customers for the finished product seems ridiculous, is wasteful of energy and resources, let alone a very poor business model. And yet I see it happening time and again. Lean tools can help to predict customer orders and manufacture just in time. Tools such as level loading and understanding the coefficient of variation of customer orders enable us to correctly predict our customer demand and help us reduce waste. And that helps us to reduce carbon footprint from running machines unnecessarily. Overproduction also causes machine wear with no business value plus further emissions, which then requires unnecessary cost to maintenance and impact to the maintenance program and the environment. I'll talk more about this when we talk about inventory. An example of this was a line making cardboard tubes, and these cardboard tubes were 15-foot long, 3 foot across with an inch wall used in the construction business. So the machines were actually running far more slowly than target due to poor maintenance. Changeovers were 3 times as long as they should have been, and that resulted in having to run extra shifts on weekends. Not only did this lead to poor retention of staff, but an increase in fuel bills for the extra 2 days. A combination of work order planning and prioritization, along with a value stream analysis and SMED exercises, single minute exchange of dies, meant that the factory could actually then close on a Friday afternoon for the weekend. And that not only reduced the carbon footprint, but also increased morale. And it was something that we could do at the shop floor. So we have to run machines to add value at OEE target speed, not to add inventory or to make up for machine inadequacies. And this is one way, one simple way that we can help save on that environmental carbon. Rework is another area. Anything is bad. Rework, rebuilding, re-engineering, resurfacing, rewiring, in fact, anything burns extra energy by extending task duration. And I'm surprised when I'm told I didn't have the time to do the job properly, but the same individual then did the job twice. A lean process produces the highest first pass yield and ensures product gets to the customer, be that internal or external, at the rate and condition expected, right first time, every time. Short interval control and counter coaching, for example, with robust root cause problem solving, be that in a manufacturing plant, making paper, maintaining train engines, food manufacture, or recently, as I saw in a company making artificial hip joints, all drives out waste and so reduces the carbon footprint. Rework is also increased when machines are not operating at standard due to wear, misalignment, oil leaks, air leaks, loose connections, lack of lubrication, failing bearings, and a host of other defects that you could list. Operations quite often know about these issues long before maintenance and should have a simple, accessible system to be able to enter work orders into the CMS. At the very least, there should be a set of expectations that maintenance and operations regularly talk with each other. A recent paper plant I visited had a major crash in the steam area. And one of the operators said, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. That we started to hear that noise about 6 weeks ago. Communication is key. So we have to keep our machines running to at least OEM condition, increase communication, and maximize first pass yield and takt time to drive out that waste. Even better is when a business implements autonomous maintenance where possible and has trained the operators how to look after their own machines. Now, not only does this optimize the machines to drive out rework and waste, but it also releases maintenance to work on the more complex jobs that will add further value to the business, particularly as qualified and experienced maintenance people are harder and harder to find. So people and efficient machines run far more economically than inefficient machines, and thus also add to the drive for net zero and reduced waste. The fourth area is movement. Having people move around a production area, be that a building site, manufacturing work cell, or an aircraft hangar to collect parts and materials, is wasteful of effort, time, and thus energy. On a large site, this could also involve vehicles moving around that directly add to greenhouse gases. These are little things that we can impact. Wasting time with excess movement or repeat movement due to poor planning means the lights are burning longer, the forklift trucks are wearing out faster, fuel is being consumed unnecessarily, etc. In maintenance, and again, I see this far too often, downtime is extended when the technician takes 15 minutes to go back to the stores for one more bolt, or back to the tool room for another socket, or drives back to the oil store for another can of WD-40 because the one they picked up earlier was empty. Saw that recently. When the storeroom is a mile away and they travel by truck, this is adding to carbon footprint. Again, plan the whole job, collect everything in one go, and avoid extended movement and its associated waste. Reducing movement and downtime with models such as robust work order planning, SMED, Kanban, good task boxes can directly reduce carbon footprint. Again, things that we can do within our span of control. The fifth area of waste is overprocessing. So overprocessing is often a sign of poorly designed processes, poor leadership, bad instructions, unnecessary administration, or again, poor communications. Overprocessing may also be as a result of poor machine design or inadequate maintenance, inadequate job station tooling, or even poor layout of the facility. As part of our role, we need to be looking to design for maintainability, design for reliability, and implement autonomous maintenance. These reduce overprocessing, reduce environmental impact, perhaps in small ways, but ways that are within our span of control. One simple area is completing hard copy work orders. That can be eradicated in many areas now to drive to paperless work order systems. And there are now many CMS systems that can be accessed via pads, phones, and laptops that remove the need to print work orders that will be either used once and recycled, or worse, stored in filing cabinets never to be seen again. Again, things that I see regularly as I go from plant to plant. Integrating the work order system with electronic PMs, or even better with video, not only removes paper, but allows the new generations of technicians to interface with tech in a way that is completely intuitive to them, possibly not to us, but it removes a source of waste. Next slide, please. So I've spoken a couple of times about value stream analysis, and this is a particularly useful tool for us as maintenance managers and leaders. It's a primary tool for eliminating waste. And if you're not familiar with value stream analysis, then I certainly would say it's one of the first things if you're starting on a particular lean manufacturing journey to become completely au fait with. Value stream analysis is a primary tool for eliminating waste by first enabling an organization to completely understand its current processes. And so often I find working with leaders, they understand their current process for the first time when it's laid out in front of them. And then you re-engineer that process to drive out the waste, optimize production, and power up the drive to net zero. For example, in one logistics department I worked with, a value stream analysis reduced truck journeys by 15%, taking unnecessary trucks off the road and thus also reducing truck maintenance. Fewer trucks obviously reduces carbon footprint, but it also reduced truck maintenance costs and the fuel bill. The sixth waste is too much inventory. And I see this so often. Warehouse space can be a staggering cause of waste due to the power it consumes for heating, lighting, and air conditioning. The 14 billion square feet of warehousing across the USA, that's correct, 14 billion, generated 380 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2017 alone. And that's from a report in 2016. Also, I've seen many companies who still manage huge warehouses of product that they then call work in progress, WIP. Whilst that product has no immediate customers, it's not WIP, they're hedging their bets. In one plant, the leadership solution to overspill of WIP was to rent more warehouse space, increasing the carbon footprint even further rather than solving the problem. Adding more space is not the solution. True just-in-time manufacturing is the solution. And we have to look to solve problems and not try and solve symptoms. I also find that heavy industry is sometimes guilty of storing old machinery and old equipment for years and years, just in case. And I know that many have stories of when the boneyard saved our bacon, but this is often just because of poor planning. The old boneyard, poorly maintained parts once fitted will often need to be replaced as they were not properly maintained in the first place, causing more waste. In one plant I worked at, just getting rid of scrap that was taking up warehouse space, they were heating it, they were lighting it, they were air conditioning it, and they getting rid of that corner of the warehouse returned $50,000 to the maintenance budget. Far better use of the resource than we need to keep it just in case. Store what you need and only what you need and reduce your carbon footprint. Again, something that is within our span of control. And the seventh area of waste is not using people's intellect. Next slide, please. This is an area where we can truly improve in many businesses, engaging our people. Our people are our best soldiers in the fight to achieve net zero by giving them a culture with the psychological safety where they feel they can speak up and contribute to continuous improvement, such as preventative maintenance optimization, better workplace organization, Kaizen Tion if you're doing lean manufacturing, self-directing teams. And through nurturing that growth, creating corporate citizens, we then build high-performance teams that ensure our people become the powerhouse of change to reduce waste in all areas and drive the reduction to net zero and reduce other environmental wastes that they may be aware of and that we are not. One team I worked with had been changing out electrical parts that had a supposed 3-year life and throwing them into the scrap, and had been doing for years. A new team member asked, have we ever carried out an experiment to see how long they really last? It transpired that the business had never had a failure, and after changing from a 3-year change out to an agreed run to failure policy, with the components now in place for 5 years, they still did not have a failure. They were just adding to the waste stream. Using the team's intellect can reduce waste And when they then share what they've learned with others in Lean, this is part of your Koten, they also encourage others in the drive to net zero. So we need to get our people involved to drive our environmental initiatives. They know the dark corners of the business better than the leadership, and many initiatives will be at little or no cost. So we have to get ahead of the drag curve to avoid the expense of being told to clean up our act. Next slide, please. The final area of waste is transportation, and transportation is often seen as the bad boy of carbon, and the drive to take dirty fuel off the streets is now getting some traction with electric vehicles. However, large fuel-hungry vehicles, which will still be needed for some time, but their considered use can reduce carbon footprint and save the business money. Far too often, for example, in work I've done in the paper industry, I see half-empty trucks leaving the loading dock, only to be followed by another truck with the other half of the order later on or the next day. Better planning with level loading, workplace organization, and integrated IT processes can ensure trucks are carrying out fewer journeys, are more often completely full, or travel shorter distances before they fill up. This will reduce cost of ownership and carbon. I've also seen how value stream analysis can working in a large logistics organization helped us understand how orders were processed and how and when loads were planned, and that considerably reduced cost and carbon. What we've always done and the way we've always done it can be challenged, and VS value stream analysis can help us do that. As a byproduct of this exercise, the search for an ever-reduced pool of qualified drivers becomes that bit easier. So when full loads are ready to go, there is also a driver available to move that load. And if truck journeys are bad, then aircraft are worse. In one plant I'm currently working at in the Czech Republic, they routinely fly parts on commercial aircraft to service machines that are down, or to deliver finished product to the customer because they had not done a critical parts analysis to hold essential parts at min-max in their own storeroom, or not manufactured finished product in time to use cheaper and more conventional means of delivery. Again, things that are completely within the span of control. In this example, a $100 part on a first-class seat burning air miles is no substitute for professional asset management and planning. Next slide, please. So we can see that at every turn, total productive maintenance and lean continuous improvement, operational excellence processes can drive out waste. Optimizing these methodologies ensures that our people and processes are ready to drive out waste, save money, and improve productivity. So every effort, however small, carried out within our span of control helps in the drive to carbon zero. Experience shows that it's the small changes that we sustain that make the long-term impacts. So now it's over to you. What can you do to better educate yourself and your staff about environmental requirements and local legislation? What can you do to make environmental management a cultural change to engage and drive your operators, mechanics, or lubrication technicians' behaviors? What small change can you make in your maintenance operation today to drive out waste and increase your efficiency as your contribution to the drive to net zero? So I would suggest that in terms of reducing our impact on the environment, we have one of two paths to follow. One, take the initiative to drive to a more sustainable and environmentally focused way of working on our own terms, small changes that will drive value to our bottom line. Or secondly, think it only applies to other people and experience, as I did, the negative impact of the bottom line when legislation catches up with us. Much better to be masters of our own fate. Next slide. So in closing, I wish you every success in your drive to reduce environmental impact and the larger drive to net zero. I hope I have opened up the debate to think about what we can do in small ways that adds to a larger positive impact on our environment. Thank you for listening, and I will now take questions.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks. Folks, questions. If you're on mute, unmute, ask a question. Oh, geez, I could jump in here all day and ask questions around, the waste on parts, which I see all day, every day. But it's a catch-22 where, as I kind of held up the screen, stop scroll stores, especially in different industries like mining, the waste on materials, probably because some of the miners make far too much money. How do you convince the C-suite that the overspend on materials because it's a cheap way to bring reliability up is something that needs to be addressed?
Yeah. I did an example. Where was this? It was in Atlanta. The CEO was complaining about the cost of his inventory because we needed parts that the machine needed that were not in the storeroom. And he said, well, look, we have $1.7 million worth of inventory, and you want extra stuff. Said, well, actually, a lot of the stuff that's been in your inventory has been there 10 years, and you're never going to use it. What they hadn't done was really rationalize what were the critical assets they'd need. They hadn't even done a critical machine survey to understand where they needed to focus. And breakdowns were like, how did that happen? Well, it happened because you don't maintain it and you haven't got the parts to fix it, which lengthens the amount of downtime. So what I've done when I've had that argument is to actually look at what is the cost of inventory, what is the inventory you have, what is the inventory you need. And in that same plant, they had a lot of, there were dryer bearings, and these bearings, they're about 10, 12 inches across, some of these, $50,000 each, some of them, which the storeman had decided, well, the boxes take up far too much room, I'll just put them on the shelf. So they put them on the shelf, and they were all Brunel to buggery, bouncing around, and they were all scrap. And I think that exercise took out, a couple of $100,000. So the C-suite will look at the numbers without knowing what the numbers mean, and I guess you know that. Yeah. But to get a true understanding of what the inventory is, what do they need, do a critical asset survey so they have the right parts is far more important than just having lots of parts. C-suite only understands when they're getting dollars back and the graphs are really simple. So that's the only advice that I would give. Understand what the value is. Don't just look at the money. But $1.7 million worth of inventory in its value might be a quarter of that in terms of what it can do for the business.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Thanks, Tim. Peter, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. One of the things that jumped out at me was talking about your environmental walkarounds. We in the maintenance fraternity took a leaf out of the safe work observations, as you sort of aligned to, similar to that, and we came up with a planned job observation where you get out in the field and you ask about the job, how it was planned, how it was scheduled. But it occurs to me that having an environmental walk around as well on that same view of the safe work observations would be quite invaluable. Do you have a sort of a formal cheat sheet for an environmental walk around and those sorts of things? Is that easily obtainable?
Actually, I don't. What I do with the guys is say, it's amazing when you put individuals who have no experience of something into a position and say, I want you to think like a consultant. And I want you to walk around and look at things you've never looked at before. And just give me your observations. So something like the START program, behavioral-based safety, you could just realign that to be environmental. But I find when you take the guys out and say, I really value your opinion, what do you see? You get some great feedback. And I talk about the dark corners of the boneyard. I'd actually done this exercise because of impacts that I'd seen in a paper mill. And I, as the maintenance manager, I'd never been to a lot of these dark corners of scrap yards, boneyards, backs of warehouses. And when the guy said, when I said, I want to understand what's going on environmentally, it was, let me show you this. Because the people on the shop floor know what's going on. They know the plant. They know it far better than we do. They go out and touch it, smell it, and walk it. And quite often they just want to be engaged and involved and be asked for their opinion. So yeah, I would say you could just kind of copy some of the safety behavioral stuff. But in my opinion, in my experience, when you just say to guys, come and show me the bits that nobody wants to see, it's a great starting point.
Thank you, Tony.
Any questions? Any other questions, folks?
Yep, I've got one. First of all, thank you for the presentation, Tony. A question. If people took asset management serious and asset life cycle, wouldn't that reduce your waste from the design phase of equipment all the way to the implementation? But also, I understand OEMs is there to sell their product, but also make money for selling parts. But if you had management that truly understand asset management as in a holistic overview, wouldn't that reduce your parts kept in store to the correct levels? Also the duration of the equipment, but also as it designed, the environmental footprint and everything else. I just sometimes think because management higher up doesn't always understand that stuff because they focus on a different side of the business. Is that a way that could change things? I don't know, just a question.
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, as it were. Asset management is absolutely key, and senior management don't really understand it quite often because all they see is dollar amounts. And I think this is where, as maintenance leaders and reliability engineers, we have to go to them with the real data and show them what the impact of the business is in not doing asset management. Even simple things like allowing time for the technicians to go out and rotate motors by 1 3/4 turns so that you look after the motors, and that you've done a good program to understand what parts you need and when. So going back to electrical motors, for example, one plant I went to had enough electrical motors on their shelves to last them for generations, because they had a spate of, we got to buy these assets, we got to buy these assets. What we were able to do with those was, for all new motors, we arranged with the local motor supplier that they would have those motors on charge and that we could get a hold of them when we wanted. So we could reduce the amount of space in warehouses. But having the time on asset management and operations are terrible for, the machine is running great, why would I shut it down for a PM? You know, that has to change. And part of that, I think, is also with the training of operations and autonomous maintenance. When the guys know how to look after their assets, and they actually get some pride in keeping it cleaner and running smoother than everybody else, then that can only be good for the business. But asset management absolutely is key. If for no other reason that we're not breaking stuff down faster and throwing it into the scrapyard just to store it somewhere else. That whole area, PM optimization, the right PMs, understanding what the OEM basic was for the PM, and then overlaying that with what we need on that piece of kit, because we never run it like the OEM. Certainly in the paper industry, it's got to be run faster, harder, and longer. So what impact does that have on our asset management? What else do we need to do in order to main production, and getting the operations folk really aligned and understanding what they're doing? I mean, another classic example in the paper industry was I was called in one day because they weren't getting throughput of pulp through the machine, through the processes that they needed. So I asked him, so where on the pump curve are you actually running your assets at the moment? And the operations guys didn't even know what a pump curve was. So they've got to understand how to own their assets, and we're the only people that can educate them on that. So building the relationship with operations, understanding that if a PM has come up, it needs to be done, that run to failure isn't the option for a paper machine or any other machine. And that's all you can get if you avoid doing the PMs, is run to failure. But yeah, asset management, I could talk about that all day. Great subject. And yeah, it's key.
Peter Durrant to go
Tony,
in.
further to that question, Yeah, further to that question, Tony, I too have a military background similar to yourself, and was schooled in the world of logistic support analysis. The whole optimization of your support gear is part of a science, basically. What is the difference where you've come from your military aircraft background into industry and seen the differences in those sorts of areas?
Great question. I remember I just left the Air Force, went into my first job. I actually wanted to stay in defense, but I'd moved to the States. And even though I'd been working there for the Pentagon, they said, no, you're now a civilian, so you can't work in defense for 5 years. So I looked for a job as a reliability engineer, and that's how I ended up in the paper industry. And my first day in, the maintenance manager said to me, so this is a bit different to an airplane, isn't it? And I think he was trying to say that, you know, this is far more complex or whatever. I said, actually, it's exactly the same in so many regards. It's a piece of integrated engineering that's dealing with hydraulics and pneumatics and electronics and electrical systems and structural engineering, exactly the same as the aircraft. The bonus is, with an aircraft, you can't pull over when you're doing 50 feet, 400 knots across the desert. With your machine, you've got the opportunity to be far more interactive and to get the planning. And in that particular plant, there were two big areas that I put in place that had immediate changes. One was they had a lot of alignment issues with pumps coming out of alignment, motors coming alignment, with jack shafts shearing after startup, and all of these issues. And when I did a root cause analysis, I found that there wasn't a torque wrench in the building, and that every time they were touching things, it was 3 white knuckles and a cheetah bar, and bolts were being taken through yield and taken to the point where as soon as you start the machine up, the extra vibration would crack off nuts. The millwrights had no understanding of how a fastener worked, had no understanding of compressive force, why you had to put clean bolts in clean holes, the difference between wet lube and doing a dry fit, why you used a washer, when you used a washer. And some of the basics just weren't in place. So I was able to relate directly from this is what we do on an aircraft right down to an electrical terminal block with a 2-pound torque wrench to make sure every screw is at the right torque, so you can turn that into compressive force and stop things falling apart. So that was one major education. And these were millwrights that some of them had 25 and 30 years experience, but didn't know why torque loading was essential. So that increased reliability. With the electricians, there was a whole spate. If you have a look on the IDCON website, at maintenanceworld.com, I've just had an article published there on electrical reliability. And what I found in the paper mill was it was perfectly adequate to get a cable, use a box knife, trim off the insulation. If you lose a few conductors, well, that doesn't make much difference. Shove it in a tag, crimp it down with a pair of pliers, throw it on a terminal block. Oh, look, what a surprise, it's burnt out, or we've got an open circuit or a short from a stray conductor. So using the same discipline for simple electrical terminations that we used on aircraft, I brought to that paper mill. I know over an 18-month period, because it took time, and I actually put in a PM to go through every MCC and do the same kind of checks and discipline. But over 18 months, we reduced the electrical loss time by 2/3, which was massive. But it was just by, this is how you prepare a cable, this is how you do a crimp. And yes, crimping is a low skill, highly repeatable activity, but it's highly repeatable when you know what the detail is. So that was a direct transfer from military experience into increasing reliability in the paper mill.
I think we've got time for one more question. Oscar, I know you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So as a master black belt, always get some challenges when implementing some lean principles in the asset management space. And I guess it's in particular like challenging when in doing the engagement and getting the commitment, as people said before, from leaders of the operation. So, and also getting the training to the staff, like it gets you get some frustration. So, but from your experience, Tony, what are those like major barriers or obstacles, you know, like when implementing the Lean principles in maintenance?
Yeah, great question. Operational excellence is always people plus processes. And as Lean practitioners, we have all of the tools. And I think too often we can just focus on tools. And managers, you know, will turn around and say, oh yeah, the Lean guy is in, he gets paid by the board. The more boards that go up, the more efficient we are. So they don't really understand what we do. The biggest part for me, and when I'm quite often called into organizations where you can see SQDC boards that are up, but they've not been filled in, short interval control where nothing is being done, 5S boards that have got no tools on. And the bit that's missing is the people bit. Really engaging the people. You can't build high performance teams without understanding the why. And I take a lot of time trying to build up the organizational culture and getting people to understand the why we want to do it. And the thing that really wins them over is by saying to them that I'm going to improve your day. I'm going to make your life better. Your life will be easier. Your workload will be easier. And let me now show you how. But then including them in building the solution, not giving them the solution. So it's rather like every Lean manufacturing interaction is a coaching opportunity. So I like to coach through to operational excellence, never delivering or training. It's, you know, what do you need? How can I make your day better? And even with Carter coaching, at the end of that, when I've gone through what's the target, what's the actual, what's the barriers, what are you doing about it? When can I expect to be a sea change? I always then ask, what else can I do to improve your day? And when you get past, get rid of my boss and give me a pay rise, and they start to come up with real problems, then they get you on side, you know, and they start to see that this is a beneficial relationship. So a simple example was in the tube and core plant, they would print a part number at the end of the production line onto those tubes and cores. And I went through the standard Carter coaching then and asked the operator, what else can I do to improve your day? And he said, well, I've been trying to get a sink put here for the last 8 years. I just want to be able to wash my hands to get this ink off, because he was not allowed to go to the washroom on his shift. It was too far away. But management says I can't have a sink. So I said, okay, so let me go talk to management. And they couldn't put in pipelines, traditional pipelines, because they couldn't dig up the floor. They couldn't take them in over the top. So I found a green solution where they could be able to clean their hands by just this sink. You just kind of roll it out and it's like activated apple juice, I think it was. So he could clean his hands. So once he was then won over and saw that we really wanted to help, he came up with all sorts of other ideas about how he could improve his efficiency. So operational excellence is always people plus process. And I think we have to put as much time into the people as we do into the processes.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
I think we probably, any more questions, folks? I think if you have any more questions, we have got some more time.
They're all questioned out, Ian.
Questioned out, all thinking about their beer Friday afternoon, thinking about a glass of wine. Thank you so much, folks. If any more questions, we can certainly field them to Tony. I know that he will be more than happy to have a chat with you. So please let us know. Thank you so much for joining us. Just before we finish, Lisa, I think you wanted to say a few words.
Just a massive thank you, Tony. You know, these masterclasses are a new offering to the community, being part of this hub that we've created, bringing the community online. And it's, you know, we've been building these communities for years where people keep saying, we come to the conference, we network, we connect, and then we leave. And so we are building this gathering and this ecosystem that's so established already, to then stay connected together. And we're making sure that we give value to have them want to come in, and value to have all of you want to stay there as well. So that hub, this mainstream community platform, is going to be pretty exciting for you moving forward. You'll find this masterclass has been recorded and will be available on that hub. And there's plenty more things in there. There's going to be, you know, interviews, podcasts, white papers, research, access to training, all sorts of things in there. There's the link. Chris has just put it through. It's a very exciting initiative, which we probably should have come up ages ago, but that's okay. We continue to reinvent and think outside the square and develop things as we go. And this community is the most beautiful community to where we're proud to bring a voice through this hub for everybody, because you are very good at sharing and exchanging. So thank you, Tony, for provoking thought, sharing some of your invaluable insights. And to everyone here, thank you for coming on today. To most of you, I think 99% of you are actually coming to mainstream. It's 2 weeks away. We've got 500 people. And we must say it's getting really a rumbling of excitement. People are saying it is the most unique program they've ever seen. So a big shout out to Ian, the key producer on this call, who's behind the content. And the networking's next to none. So we're very excited about that. And we'd love you all to join the platform, because it is going to be something special for you, where you can connect with each other, you can ask questions, it's going to be just something really value adding to your life. So on that note, a huge thank you again, and we wish you a good weekend, and see you in 2 weeks time on Tuesday. And we hope you all come to the Jumpstart as well, which is 6:30 to 7:30 the evening before mainstream. So we'll see you there. Very excited about it, as you can tell. And thanks for all being amazing. See you soon.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you,
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Cheers, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Tell us if you
Cheers.
can call me if you change your mind. I'm joking. Bye, everyone.
You just made me
See ya.
jealous, so I'm not sure I want
Tried
to.
to make you laugh. All right, everyone. Bye for now.
See
See you, folks.